An entire generation sacrificed their hair to a lie, and chances are you're still living by it. For much of human history and across cultures, long, healthy, thick hair tended to be the norm, at least much more so than today, when you have droves of people losing hair in their 20s or unable to grow it past shoulder length due to continued breakage. And this in a time when hairdressers, commercial hair products of every kind, and hairstyling tools are more accessible than ever before. What gives? What did we lose as a culture when we threw out our grandmothers' and ancestors' hair care techniques and began following the advice of corporations instead? And don't write this off. This is an effect that is still happening today. In India, for example, traditional hair care practices like hair oiling are still widely used, and many people there have very thick, long, beautiful hair. But what we can see happening is that when people from India, for example, may be immigrating to the West or just adopting more modern Western hair care techniques, their once beautiful long hair is literally falling out and breaking off. So what we are pinpointing here is something that I'm going to call the cultural burn cycle. Basically, when any kind of revolution in society occurs, be it social, ideological, or technological, it usually ends up destroying much more than it intends to. Within a couple generations, the knowledge and traditions that took hundreds or thousands of years to grow and blossom are not only disrupted, but completely wiped away and forgotten. This cultural burn cycle applies to bigger turning points in human society, but in this case, let's apply it to the way humans, at least here in the West, care for our bodies and our hair. For all of human history until the last century, knowledge of how to care for one's hair was generally passed down from mother to daughter or father to son. These were techniques that may have been slow or inconvenient by modern standards, but they worked, which is why they stood the test of time. Things like hair oiling, gentle detangling, avoiding drastic haircuts, and gently styling hair in a way to keep it tucked away and protected from the elements, using natural, earth-based ingredients to care for one's hair. And more than all of this, the main gist of historical hair care was viewing one's hair as a sacred extension of one's own body, something that wasn't merely a cosmetic appendage or just a fashion statement, but a part of your body that deserved respect and gentle care, not forcing it into constantly evolving fashion trends and frying it into submission. With the massive political, social, and familial changes of the 20th century, there was something really big happening in the world, much, much bigger than just beauty and hair care. This was a complete reordering of how we as a people view knowledge. Is it something to be passed from family member to family member and treasured for generations? Or is it something we get from constantly evolving experts, or more likely, money-hungry corporations that promise big things? I would suggest the latter is what has happened. Now, before we get into bashing modern hair care ideas, let's just acknowledge some of the good things that have come with time, because definitely some positive things have happened with modern attitudes about hair. First of all, there has been a widening of what is considered to be acceptable beauty standards. This probably has to do with things like the internet exposing people to a wider range of people and ideas than ever before. Modern hair philosophies have possibly also given more freedom to spend less time on one's hair if you so desire. Commercial hair products, heat styling tools, and shorter haircuts can definitely help with that if saving time is your only priority. And finally, for positives of modern hair care ideas, there is also perhaps a greater appreciation, at least by our current day, of different racial hair textures. This has been a long time coming, and arguably I would say the culture around hair conformity was probably worse in, say, the 1950s than previously in history, but I'm definitely not an expert on this. So what I am suggesting in this video is not that the 20th century hair care revolution didn't achieve anything good or open up more possibilities for some people. It did. But what I am suggesting is that, like any revolution, this created a sort of burn cycle where much more was lost in the process than what was gained, and that hair care traditions that worked were just burned away and forgotten in the course of 1 or 2 generations. So with all that said, let's jump into the top 4 pieces of hair care advice that secretly ruined an entire generation. Because I think in concepts, I am going to break this down into damaging hair care ideas, which then led to a whole lot of on-the-ground damaging hair care practices that I will elaborate on in each section. Keep watching until the last point because it is a pretty unexpected one. Okay, so one more thing before we get into this. I'm selecting 20 brave women to get my 4.9 star Herbal Hair Growth Oil and 6 months of hair consultations completely free. So if you're struggling with breakage, thinning, or hair that just won't grow no matter what you do, I want to invite you to the Catherine Haircare Herbal Hair Growth Challenge. Here's how it works. Click the first link in the description and you'll be asked to share your hair story, what you're struggling with, what you've tried, and where you want your hair to be. You'll also upload a quick photo of your current hair so we can track your progress together. Then I'll hand select 10 to 20 women to receive a free bottle of my Herbal Hair Growth Oil, along with special instructions for faster and fuller results. Over the next few months, we'll track your progress and I'll personally guide you with advice to overcome your unique hair challenges. And at the 6-month mark, we'll choose one woman with the most powerful transformation to receive a generous year's supply of oil, completely free, to keep the progress going. Even if you're not selected, we'll send you a 15% discount code as a thank you for applying. So what's the catch? Full transparency, this is a marketing campaign. Your transformation will become a cornerstone in the Catherine Hair Care movement, a living, breathing example that real results are possible. In a world of false promises and lackluster results, women with similar struggles need to see proof. And your journey could be the one that helps them realize that hope isn't lost for their hair after all. So if you're brave enough to share your story, this is your chance to see real results, get personalized advice, and finally get hair that you're proud of without having to pay to test it out. The submission period will only be open for a limited time, so if this is you, pause the video now, click the first link in the description, and let's help you get the hair you've always deserved. Let's get back into the top 4 bad modern ideas about hair now. Negative belief number 1. You are gross, stinky, and dysfunctional. Buy our product to fix it. Okay, so let's face it. So much of the movement we saw towards commercialized, made in a lab, artificially perfumed products beginning in the 1930s and 40s was due to really smart mass marketing. This was marketing that played on what are most people's natural insecurities. For example, the fear that one might smell bad to other people without realizing it, and that the only way to prevent this is to buy said company's perfumed products and use them regularly as a sort of insurance policy. This kind of mass fear-based marketing was also used in a larger and more insidious way. That is, to convince people that their bodies were naturally dirty, full of disease-causing bacteria, and frankly, just dysfunctional. That is, you couldn't trust your scalp to not produce way too much oil, you couldn't count on not having dandruff, and you couldn't count on having healthy hair. Rather, negative disease states to do with the scalp or the hair, like dandruff, frizzy or weak hair, or balding, were just the default position. So that is, unless you purchased these heavy-handed, made-in-a-lab chemical concoctions to correct the mistakes of nature. So in other words, your hair and scalp's natural state was to be completely dysfunctional, and the only way to band-aid this was with external, artificial products. Okay, so am I saying that we should never use hair products? Of course not. People throughout history have used all sorts of products on their hair and scalp. But I would suggest that there are 2 big differences with a healthy, discretionary use of products to the kind of mass fear marketing beginning in the 20th century. So 1, products throughout history were generally used with a healthier attitude. So they didn't believe that their hair or body were dysfunctional. They believed that they were smart and perfect the way they were. But perhaps there were still challenges or things they would like to improve, but the goal of any product used would be to mobilize and encourage the body's own drive towards health and homeostasis. Do you see how this is really different? This leads me to reason number 2 that a healthy use of products is different than the fear marketing pushed in the 20th century. Products should almost always be based on natural ingredients that are as unprocessed as possible. Why? Because this is just what our bodies are designed to recognize and respond to. Yes, herbal and natural treatments can treat certain symptoms, but they usually do so in a more holistic way that can adjust based on the individual's needs. Quick example, lavender essential oil can be added to hair treatments of all kinds and is known as a balancing oil. So in other words, if you have too much oil production, it can help to calm it down. Or if you have too little oil production, it can help to encourage more oil production. To me, this suggests that the lavender oil is not simply band-aiding specific symptoms, but rather helping to mobilize the body's own desire for healing and homeostasis. Bad advice number 2. Your hair is merely a fashion accessory. So the second piece of hair care advice that ruined an entire generation is that your hair exists merely as a fashion accessory or a sort of cosmetic appendage. In other words, your hair is much like your clothing or accessories, lifeless in itself, dead and meaningless, except insofar as it allows you to follow the latest trends or to suit your personal whims of how you want to present yourself. Compare this to the traditional, historical, or holistic view of hair, which is that hair is an extension of oneself or a reflection of our inner being and state of health, and that it is deeply personal. Okay, so here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that hair was never viewed as a way to express oneself or even to follow fashion trends in history. Rather, that simply wasn't the only thing it was. It was also much, much more. In the modern day, we have kind of taken this full reality of what hair really is and flattened it down to what we consider the most important thing, which is how it looks outwardly. Therefore, we are willing to do all kinds of objectively harmful things to our hair, like chemical hair dyes, curling or straightening treatments, heat tools, aerosol hairspray, back combing, etc., all to try to achieve a certain outward look. So what every person who values the long-term health of their hair and inner being needs to do, ideally, is to develop their own sense of who they are and what their hair is on the deepest level. They need to get a sense of what is good for them, ultimately, and what is good for their hair. And then, when the desire arises to do something to your hair to achieve a certain look, which is completely natural, we can weigh this against the deeper understanding of what our hair truly is. And this is going to look different for everyone. So for me, since I view my hair as an extension of my body and a living thing, I choose not to ever use heat on it, especially in the form of direct heat like straighteners or curlers. Why? Because I wouldn't apply a hot iron to any other part of my body, so why my hair? Just because I can't feel immediate pain from doing so like I would on my skin doesn't mean there isn't damage occurring. But I do choose to use other non-damaging techniques to style my hair and achieve the look that I desire. It's just all about determining where that line is for oneself. Bad advice number 3. Hair should be dramatically shaped through cutting. So one of the biggest changes that began happening in the 20th century was this idea that hair should be dramatically shaped through cutting. Now, yes, women have always wanted to shape and style their hair to make a fashion statement or to suit their face. However, in most times and cultures, this styling and shaping was achieved through the way the hair was styled, not the way it was cut. Generally, people believed that hair was best kept at relatively the same length, meaning no layers. This also helped to keep ends healthier since there is strength in numbers. And it helped to avoid the modern problem of fatty, modern haircuts with lots of layers, causing a nightmare when needing to be grown back out. Haircuts like this also make protective styles more difficult to achieve, but more on that in the last point. Finally, this belief leads to a culture in which it is considered completely normal and even encouraged to cut our hair dramatically to suit a transitory mood or fad. And while this is of course perfectly fine and up to each individual, having a culture where this is viewed as normal and encouraged can be problematic. Now, it is entirely normal to use our hair to suit our moods and our fancies, but ideally this will be achieved through more minor changes that aren't permanent, like styling it differently, for instance. Bad advice number 4. Hair should always be worn loose. Okay, so this is a big one, and I would say it's pretty unexpected. On the surface, it may not seem like it's such a big deal. After all, what's the problem with wearing hair loose? I'm wearing my hair loose right now. Nothing is wrong with wearing your hair loose, of course. However, a society that defines loose hair as the default option and everyday updos typically is something we only use when we are busy or frazzled, or maybe we're a professional athlete and we're in the middle of a sport, that makes a huge difference in how we view and care for our hair. This philosophy will probably lead to generally shorter hair lengths being viewed as the norm, which is of course what we've seen happen, because longer hair is obviously a lot more convenient to wear loose on the daily. The historical mindset of hair being an extension of oneself and not merely a cosmetic appendage, as we talked about earlier, typically goes hand in hand with wearing hair up in protective styles more often. In other words, if my hair is a part of me and it has intrinsic value apart from just how it looks, then it's not just an accessory that needs to be flaunted all the time in order to look put together. Okay, but really when you get down to it, what's the problem with wearing hair loose all of the time? So the main result of a culture that wears hair loose all the time, or at least encourages this as the default, will be the overuse of styling of all kinds. So I'm talking about things like hair dyes, chemical treatments, frequent shampooing, tons of styling products, heat tools, you name it. All of these will be and are overused in a culture that views loose hair as the normal default option. The fact is that updos, braids, and protective styles are not only more protective for the hair by keeping the fragile ends tucked away, but it also means that all of these aforementioned damaging practices will simply be used less often, since updos or even braids hide so much more and don't require a ton of processing on the hair itself to look nice. Okay, so with all of that said, this has been the top 4 pieces of hair care advice that ruined an entire generation. If you'd like to hear more about some of the solutions to these hair care problems, I do have a pretty large library of hair care videos on my channel here that can give you more than enough to get started. I also have a free hair growth cheat sheet that you can sign up for on my website with some of my favorite all-natural recipes, and it's all for free. Finally, if you're interested in a chance to try out my Herbal Hair Growth Oil for free, along with 6 months of consulting with me, be sure to sign up for my Hair Growth Challenge. It's the first link in the description. Thanks for joining me for this investigation of our culture's hair philosophies, and I'll see you on the next video.